This is Theatre International's World's Indigenous Peoples. I'm your host, Rey Allen. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to World's Indigenous Peoples. And as you know, we are very happy that you tune in. We do not take that lightly, okay? And we are happy that you are interested in terms of things that deals with people of indigenous cultures, both here in the United States, throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and worldwide. The last time I was with Bobby Gonzalez, my associate producer, he promised me that he will be back, and he have kept his promise. Once again, I have my dear friend, Bobby Gonzalez.
So
Welcome, Bobby.
Thank you. We meet again.
We meet again. Yes. So, we have so many wonderful stories about indigenous peoples, and particularly the Taino and American Indians and all that. And I like to talk about some of our history in terms of connections, really. Steve Jobs always said, you must connect the dots in your life. And I have been doing that for some time, but when he said that, a matter of fact, when he said that, I began to take more notice of the dots, connecting the dots in my life. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about some of the things that I've learned over the years in terms of how we intersect, you know. But first of all, the last time you were on, we talked about the Bronx and the American Indians that mainly inhabited the Bronx. And tell us once again, quickly, about the Bronx. Just a recap.
Well, I didn't mention the last show the name of the people who lived in the Bronx back then. There were different groups, including the Siwanoy, West Wiswick, Wickawankwak, and don't ask me to spell those words, okay?
All right.
And sometimes they used to travel over to what's called Long Island today and visit their cousins. One group called the Canarsie, another group called...
One group called the Canarsie?
There was
really?
a tribe called the Canarsie, and there's still some descendants who still live there. A group called the Rockaway. That's the name of a people.
Okay. Hello, Brooklyn.
Yeah, but of course, the most famous of this area were the Lenape, who lived in Manhattan, which they called Manhattan, land of many hills.
Manhattan.
Right.
And once again, let's hear those, the key tribe that lived in Manhattan.
Were the Lenape, and supposedly they were the ones who made the transaction with the Dutch for $24 worth of beads and other baubles, and of course they didn't believe that they were selling the land. They believed, okay, you're giving us all these items and you have use of the land. But they had no concept of land ownership. The land didn't belong to a people or any individual. And so private
the
ownership
land belonged to the universe.
Right, it was collective ownership. And that's how it was for most Native peoples throughout the Americas.
Now, Bobby, you said Manhattan Island. Now, you just mentioned that the Dutch, we are the United States of America. What does the Dutch have to do with this? Tell us.
Well, they came here before there was a United States.
Oh.
All right.
Interesting.
And now, what's also very interesting is they...
But Then does that have something to do with the British as well?
Well, the British came in later. Well, they were getting hemmed in by the British on all sides.
The
So I
Dutch.
don't know, right? So I wonder if you know about the deal they made with the British.
Tell us about that.
Well, they said, okay, they're going to swallow us all up, so let's make a trade. And they traded New Amsterdam for a tract of land in South America. All right? And Suriname, Dutch Guyana, that whole area. So that was a swap. So you give us that, and we'll give New Amsterdam to you.
So Suriname was swapped for New
New Amsterdam.
Amsterdam.
Right. Some people say that wasn't a good deal, but the Dutch didn't have a choice. All right, they were being surrounded, so they said, "Well, let's make this transaction and get out of town."
Let's make this transaction with who?
The British.
With the British. Okay. And get out of town.
Right. Of course, many of the people of Dutch descent stayed there. I know when I was growing up in the South Bronx, I knew a couple of families with Dutch surnames. There's still a legacy they left behind.
The Dutch Reformed Church.
Right. Also,
Churches also.
I told you about I don't know if I told you I had a powwow in the Bronx for over 25 years, but I started in Van Cortlandt Park. Van Cortlandt. The Dutch heritage there.
The Dutch
Yeah.
heritage?
Yeah, so I think the last elected mayor of New York City of Dutch descent was, before your time, Robert Wagner.
Robert Wagner. Yes. Yes. He was of Dutch descent.
Yes, he was.
Interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah. So you had all these people living here in the New York City area, and we could travel back and forth. And they spoke a Algonquian language. And many of the native people who live today in Long Island are reviving that language. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention the largest reservation in the area, and that's the Shinnecock. And that's over at the eastern end of Long Island. And if your audience wants to have a good time, every Labor Day weekend, they have a huge powwow at Shinnecock Reservation. They're federally recognized now. And you have another reservation, which is in Suffolk County, is Puspatook. It's only a few acres in size, but it's recognized by New York State.
Yes.
And there's so many native stories. I'm trying to think of a good native story from the New York City area. Well, you'll see a lot of that culture and history this coming spring. They're opening up an exhibition at the National Museum of the American Indian in Bowling Green, bottom of Manhattan, Natives of New York.
Natives of New York. And this is going to be in the spring?
In the spring of 2020. But it's a complicated story because they include the native people of Long Island, New York City, and upstate New York. People who live in upstate New York were mostly Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, Six Nations.
Yes. Upstate New York. Or what about in Connecticut?
Connecticut, we're talking about the Pequot. I remember I emceed a powwow over in that territory, and I performed at the museum. This is a Bronx Night story involving this. Went up to the Pequot Museum, but first we dropped off at the hotel, my wife and I. And of course, we put on the TV, and who did I see? Rena Valentine. Bronx Night TV broadcast all throughout New England. I didn't know that. So maybe if we play our cards right, this might be playing up in Rhode Island or Connecticut in a few months.
Well, I tell you what. Well, we have a larger viewing audience now because it's worldwide, because we're able to stream here from BronxNet. We're able to stream all over the world now.
Well, I do a lot of storytelling in the schools, and before I begin, I told them, back in the days when the native people was all native people here, they had no TV, no computers. And the students said, what did they do? No phones? I said, no.
How did they survive? Without
yeah,
phones,
it sounds so boring. I said, every night
without texting and all that.
you would sit around the fire, and there would be storytelling.
A campfire.
Yeah. It could be, no, here in the New York City area, they did not have teepees. They lived in wigwams, which was a dome-shaped domicile. They would bend saplings and then put strips of tree bark over it. A lot more complicated than that, but they lived in wigwams. And especially in the winter, they would sit around the fire and tell stories. And some of these stories were hundreds, or if not thousands of years old. And people say, what do you mean stories thousands of years old? Well, when Columbus came to the Caribbean, the Taino had a story about the Great Flood. When did that happen? Thousands of years ago. And as Europeans went up and down the Americas, most everyone had a story about the Great Flood, because it did happen, and they preserved the histories in the stories. And they told stories. They also had messengers. Well, back then there were no computers, no telephones. So
there were no other choice but having messengers and have pigeons taking.
Well, they used to have messengers, and a good example of that, I heard the story recently. General Custer's entire outfit was wiped out by the Lakota Sioux and the China and the Arapaho. This happened in 1876. And I was told they sent out writers, messengers in all four directions to share the news. And my friend, he's from a pueblo in New Mexico called Santo Domingo. He says, one messenger got all the way down there to spread the news. I said, wow, they did travel. So they didn't have cars.
This
they didn't
by
have
horseback.
By horseback. And the horses were brought up by the Europeans. So before then, if you wanted to spread news, canoe or take a long hike.
Now, Bobby, we go back many years, but every time we sit down to talk, I learn something new from you consistently, which is a wonderful thing. Learn a lot about history and about the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and of course the Taino, which I am part Taino myself. But we had a conversation about 2 days ago, and somehow it came up in terms of while I was working at the William Morris Agency, which I worked for in the 80s for 8 years. In the 80s for 8 years, wow, the eights. And then you turned and said to me, how you worked at the William Morris Agency when you were in high school.
In high school, that was many years before that, you know.
That was before me.
Yeah, I worked in the mailroom at William Morris Agency.
And who was, now when I worked at the William Morris Agency, Lee Stevens, who was the president of William Morris, Lou Weiss was the chairman. And Lee Stevens was the first president of the William Morris Agency in the many years of the William Morris Agency, which was one of the oldest talent agency and largest talent agency in the world. Next to them was ICM, International Creative Management. And they've always had a short presidents. Lee Stevens was about 6'3", And there's something that was always talked about because they've always had short presidents. And before Lee Stevens, it was Abe Lasvogel. And Abe Lasvogel was the president when you worked there, isn't it?
Yeah, he was about 4'10". He was a short guy, but like I told you, probably the most powerful person in show business. And I don't know if William Morris handled any Native American performers. But recently we had the Academy Awards, the Oscars.
Yes.
And someone told me just before the Oscars, oh yes, well this young lady a couple years ago was the first Indigenous person to be nominated for an Oscar. I said, correction. Back in the 50s, there was someone who won two Academy Awards. A guy named Anthony Quinn, whose entire name was Anthony Quinn Oaxaca. His mother was
Anthony Quinn.
Zapotec from Mexico. You know, and so he was the first Indigenous person to win an Academy. He won 2 Academy Awards, you know.
Yes.
And we've had a number of Native people. Chief Dan George made a movie with Clint Eastwood. But probably the most viewed Native American actor was Jay Silverheels, who was Tonto in The Lone Ranger during the TV series. All right? So, and sometimes you didn't know that they were Native. Did you ever see a TV show way back in the days called The Untouchables?
Yes, of course.
All right. There was an actor called Abe Youngblood. He had a a part in that series, and he was a Yaqui native. We also have Native people in the Native American Music Hall of. There's a Native American Music Hall of Fame.
Yes.
One person elected to that Hall of Fame was Jimi Hendrix. It was Cherokee. Richie Valens, who did La Bamba,
Yes.
was Yaqui from Mexico. So you have all these people with indigenous heritage, and no one knows about it.
Wow.
And that's why one reason why we're having this show.
Exactly. To educate. To educate. And back with William Morris, I remember very clearly. I got the opportunity to meet Abe Lasvogel about one time. It was about just a few years after I started working with the William Morris Agency when he made his transition. Passed away. A matter of fact, I can tell you, it was in September. It had to be in September of 1983, because that was my first vacation I had after I started working with William Morris Agency. That's the first vacation that I actually took, and I went down to St. Martin and Anguilla and all that. And while I was in St. Martin, they called me. I got the news that Abe Lasvogel had passed, and of course, all of William Morris went to the funeral and all that. So I missed that. There were so many memories of him. Katharine Hepburn, who was very close. Each one of them had their favorite actress or personality person. Katharine Hepburn was his favorite actress, and he took her on as this young lady who he helped to mold her career and everything. And Lee Stevens with Barbara. Oh my goodness.
Streisand?
No.
Stanwyck?
No. The announcer from
Oh, Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters. It was Lee Stevens. These guys were just incredible. I remember having talking with Lee Stevens, and he knew that I was into show business and all that, and he said, I can do a mean tap dance, you know. I said, you? And that height also? And he went into a tap dance number.
Wow.
It was really, it was very interesting, very interesting. So, but William Morris, the 8 years I spent there, and I moved up from the mailroom on up, because the mailroom was the place like the university. Everybody that came in there had to come through the mailroom unless you came in as a top agent from somewhere else, or an attorney from someplace else, CBS or one of the major networks or something like that. But if not, you start out from the mailroom and work your way up to become an agent. You know, were you there when the cookie guy was? He was in the R&B department. Uncle Cookie, the black guy.
Not Amos.
Famous Amos.
Who lost control. He has no control. He lost it through bad management.
Bad management.
He lost control of Famous Amos.
Unfortunately, because he knew management, because he was an agent in the R&B department at William Morris Agency. He left just before I came in to start the business. Yeah, he was there. He was there. I don't know if he was there at the time you were there.
No, it was before.
There was another African American guy there. I don't remember his name.
There weren't too many.
It was not too many. It was not too many. Robert Johnson was he was an attorney, and he was in the R&B department. The only one that was in television was oh my God. Anyhow, I can't remember her name right now. But it was not too many of us.
No.
Not too many of us were there at all.
Who I saw there once, and she was Cherokee. I remember you call him Keely Smith, the singer. And her husband was very famous. See, my mind's slipping. This is going back many years, maybe half a century. Louis Prima from New Orleans. And sometimes now coming up at the Museum of the American Indian, they're going to have a Native American jazz show. Because there's a lot of Native American influence in jazz. The Queen of Swing back in the 30s was Mildred Bailey. She was from a tribe called the Coeur d'Alene. And I was doing research for an article on Native Americans in jazz, and someone who worked with him told me that Duke Ellington's grandmother was Cherokee. And Duke Ellington and his sister would be playing on the floor of the kitchen, and the grandmother would be singing Cherokee songs. So it's a certainty that he internalized those melodies and rhythms, and it came out through his music.
Of course, most definitely. Lawrence Hilton Jacobs' sister, that I was trying to remember, who was an agent at William Morris Agency. Malcolm X's second daughter, second or third daughter, she came to William Morris Agency, worked with William Morris Agency for about a year or two while I was there. Yeah, that was very interesting.
Well, if William Morris was still around today, maybe we could go back, make a return trip, and say, hey, can you help us out, promote our show?
Right?
But their office is no longer here.
No longer here, yes, because in 2017, I spent 6 months in Romania directing some shows there. And when I came back, I said, well, let me stop over at William Morris and let them know what I've been doing and all that. And I stopped and said, "Oh, William Morris no longer here." I was stunned.
Life is about change. For what I understand, they were absorbed by ICM, so they're a part of that because you hardly hear the name William Morris anymore.
Well, I know that they still have their office in California, in LA, but they probably partnered up with ICM because ICM and William Morris, they were the two top dogs, in the business for many years and the oldest, But things have changed so tremendously in terms of the business that, back then, in order to get any kind of major recognition, you had to have an agent, a top-fledged agent behind you. But with social media and everything today, it's no longer the same. It's
It
a
still
totally different
helps
animal.
a whole lot. For example, if you want to be a screenwriter, a studio won't even look at the screenplay unless it's brought to them by a recognized agent.
Tell me about it. I have stories to tell about that and how I was used in many times.
So maybe there's an agent in the audience who
Yeah.
wants to handle us, and you can contact us through BronxNet, and maybe we can sit down and talk.
Yes. Well, as I said, when I was at William Morris Agency, I was used to make many contacts to major producers and there, because that's the thing. They would not, regardless of how great your screenplay may be, they would not look at it unless it was presented by a major agent.
A
Agency.
10%er.
Exactly. So, Bobby, once again, it's great having you here with sitting, and every time we sit and talk, there's such great words of wisdom, and I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you have learned something. I always learn something with him. So, once again, thank you so much for tuning in to Theatre International. I'm your host, Rey Allen. See you next time.